One thing that I could show...
Are these antiquarian pieces?
Oh, well, I have a huge collection of apparatus, and I love chemical glassware. When Mount Holyoke College downsized their chemistry department about 10 years ago, maybe longer, I knew the stockroom guy, and they were going to lose 40% to the biology department.
Okay.
Yep, that's just the trend,
Right.
right? The trend from chemistry to biology, life sciences. And they were going to throw it all away. I've been invited to so many labs at colleges and universities around here. When they close a lab, they have a big cardboard box, tri-wall cardboard, heavy plastic liner, and they throw the stuff into it, and they have a big ram that they crush it down. Because when someone starts a lab, they want to start with new equipment. And so I've met the people where I can go in and clear the stuff out before it gets destroyed.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
I know, it's such
things.
a shame. Well, it's such a historical, so much historical importance. There are four elements that I try to bring to my work. There's the personal element, the historical, the aesthetic, and the technical. And I'm using the glassware to bring all four of those together. So many of these pieces have names of chemists associated with them, of my collection. So we can learn a little bit about the history of the culture of the day by looking at that apparatus and why that chemist felt compelled to develop it. You know, what was interesting? Was organic chemistry being developed? Was it physical chemistry? Was it just analysis of mineral samples? I've got pieces of equipment, polarimeters, that were developed because of tax regulations. When sugar imports were taxed, you had to figure out what the concentration of sugar was in a shipment. So often it came in as a syrup. They developed pieces of apparatus that you could take a sample from the hold of that ship, put it into the apparatus, and figure out the concentration of the sugar and calculate the tax,
Oh my God.
the import duty on that shipment. So there's
Taxman's always one step ahead of the
well, I know what
scientist.
that is, yes. And the scientist always seems to be very happy to help along, unfortunately, in some cases.
Well, these things have just innate beauty.
Oh, they are.
Too. I mean,
There's an
even if you
aesthetic
didn't
quality.
know what
Yeah.
it was going to be used for, I mean, this thing is just astounding.
Yeah. So all of these, I like to have as many examples as possible. So like on these cylinders, I can start seeing similarities in detail, and I can start understanding how many different manufacturers there are, what their process in making it was. You can tell a lot about the glass. And with these sorts of things, this one that you just pointed out here, I'll turn it around so that you can look at it like this. So I didn't even know these parts went together. Here, I'll turn it that way. Until I looked in a catalog. I've got 150 years of catalogs. And I looked back, I would just take catalogs home at night and page through them, and I finally found this apparatus, and it was put together with a manometer on top and this flask below, but I had never seen them together, so I didn't even know they went together. I ran back to the studio and found the two pieces and put them together, and indeed they do fit. And what this is for for determining whatever vacuum there is in this bottle. And the vacuum is produced by this pump. Now here's a piece of glass sculpture. What you do is, using these bottles filled with water up high, connect the port on the bottle to this, run water through this chamber. The water runs out the bottom, but it bypasses the little narrow orifice from this port right down there at the bottom of the funnel, and it draws air out of this as the water passes by. So you can see bubbles of air go by. So you hook this up to this, close this side off, draw the air out of that. The manometer would measure the drop in pressure, and then you would hook this up to a number of devices. You could hook it up to the still head for distilling an organic compound at a lower pressure, so you didn't have to heat it up as much, in which case you wouldn't distort the organic molecule itself. Borden did that with vacuum evaporation in making condensed milk. evaporated milk. Or you could hook it up to a distillation, or not distillation, a filtration apparatus to pull the liquid through the filter paper.
And these are just works of art of
Beautiful.
glass blowing.
Beautiful. I mean, they're
somebody
just, yeah.
could make these so exact.
Yeah, this was in a catalog, 1905 catalog. It's German, associated with the German chemist Kolbe. And Kolbe's name comes up in organic chemistry quite a bit. So it's interesting to see his apparatus. I've got other apparatus that had been reproduced. Maybe I'll go and grab a couple more things. I'll
Sure.
be right back.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's something called the Kali apparat. It's German, developed by Liebig in the mid-1800s. It shows up, I mean, the camera's not going to be able to see this, but here's a first day issue of the American Chemical Society 75th anniversary of their organization, a stamp. And it happens to be the date that I was born, September 4th, 1951. So it was in the stars that I was going to be a chemist.
Mm-hmm.
It was right there. And in the American Chemical Society logo, you see the Kali apparat, also known as a potash bulb. And when I went to the West Coast, maybe 20 years ago, there was a glass blower there that was reproducing potash bulbs. And they were used for determining the carbon content of the CO2 that came from the combustion of an organic compound. So you could take a sample of organic, burn it in a special apparatus, direct the gas through this, and all of the carbon from the original sample would be converted to CO2, and the potassium hydroxide, the potash that was in here, would absorb all of the carbon dioxide, so you could determine how much was in there.
This must have been a very important apparatus to
Very
have made its
important.
way into the American Chemical
I know.
Society logo.
Changed organic chemistry and organic
changed it,
analysis.
okay.
And Liebig is the person, the German chemist, who invented it. His name's attached to it. There were other versions of it.
Yeah.
He had a lot of students. He developed the first laboratory at Gießen, Germany, where university students would come and work in the laboratory on their own. So a lot of Americans went over there and learned it and brought it back to this country.
Amazing, yeah.
And so here's the reproduction of the potash bulb, or the Kali apparat, which I thought was really pretty cool until
You found it an original.
an original.
That had been used.
Yeah, from a German chemist who moved to Vermont.
I'd love to see how somebody made this. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Well, now you look at the two, and you can see in the images it looks flat like this, but it's not flat. It hangs this way, and the chain of apparatus, this would actually hang from a stand, and then the gas apparatus would go off to either side. But it's so much more beautiful.
Yeah, and you can see it's a thinner kind of a glass. It
Oh,
looks
yeah.
like, yeah.
Well, this I see now wouldn't function properly because of
It's
the,
still very light. Yeah.
well,
And this is like a feather. Yeah.
and that's what they did with glass through the 1800s. I've talked with curators from collections from all over the world. I've gone to conferences on scientific apparatus in university collections. Saiku is the name of the organization. And it's hard to date chemical apparatus, but through the 1800s, the way that they gave it more thermal resistance to heat changes, was to make it thinner and thinner. And but that made it weak mechanically because it couldn't. You'd wrap it on something and it would just shatter. So in 1893, the some Germans, I think it was Schott. I can't remember who did it, but it might have been Schott. In Germany, developed borosilicate glass, which has a much lower coefficient of expansion. So when you hit it with heat, it doesn't expand as much as regular glass. And regular glass breaks because if glass is thick, you hit it with heat on the outside and that expands, but the inside hasn't heated up, so it doesn't expand. So it breaks, it shatters by torque in the glass. So you can make it heat through more quickly by making it thinner. But then all of a sudden, borosilicate glass shows up in the 1890s, and you can make it thick, and it doesn't shatter with changes in temperature.
Was that, you were talking once before about Pyrex?
Pyrex was the Corning version of it.
Okay.
Yep, there was Corning Pyrex was released as chemical glassware in 1915, so 100 years ago.
Not to get too far off the subject, but why not? How did Corning end up out there in the boondocks in New York? Was there sand or something for making glass out there?
No, actually, they moved from, I think there were some place, well, they consolidated different companies, and they were closer to the shore. They were somewhere in New Jersey to start. But what happened is maybe we should wait till people go down the hallway.
It's okay.
Is that okay? Someone who had been working in New Jersey at a glass lab, another manufacturer, making, I think, thermometers. They weren't making this kind of chemical glassware, but making thermometers, and he had information that he wanted. He wrote a letter to the head of Corning and said, I think I can help you make scientific apparatus if you'd like to hire me. So it was a guy looking for, to change his position and bring more information that he had into play. And Corning developed their version of borosilicate glass. They call it non-X, non-expanding glass. And they made lenses for lamps for the railroads, because you can imagine the glass lenses in the winter would
45
break.
below in Minnesota.
I know.
Right.
You light it up and it gets hot and it cracks. So they made these non-X glass lenses, and they worked so well that they lost their market because the railroad didn't have to order many of them.
Ones, right.
So they were looking around for other uses for the borosilicate glass, and one of the researchers at Corning, his wife asked him to bring home a piece of glass in the shape of a pie plate. She wanted to make a pie. And so he took a battery jar and cut the top off, made it shallow, brought it home. She baked a pie in it. It worked beautifully. So they introduced Pyrex, and they were going to spell it originally P-I-E-R-E-X for kitchenware. But then
Fire and
well, they changed it to P-Y-R because it has that association with fire, and it's a little more scientific. So they like for the chemical glassware, they thought that would be better. But so it was a forerunner in this country, and with World War I, the government put out a call to industry to step up and to replace the European sources for a lot of stuff. Chemical porcelain, chemical glassware was all made in Bohemia and in Germany. And we lost all of that resource, so here's Corning and many other companies. And also in Ohio, where there was a lot of ceramic ware made, there were companies that made chemical porcelain.
Now, you and I were talking the first time I came up here about how Corning has moved into doing fiber optic cables, and they're doing just incredible things with the internet and being able to just pump so much information through a single fiber. With all of this high-tech stuff, and we touched on it ever so briefly with some of the chemical things, where could you see books going now that we have e-books, now that we have the internet? Is there some sort of fantasy that you could come up with for binding an e-book in some sort of, fantastical way that would match an e-book?
Well, this conversation's been going on for a long time. When hypertext came in, when was that, early 80s? There was one fellow who did a hypertext book.
Okay.
And, it was probably on who knows what computer he was using,
Sure.
but everybody was talking about it.
It really, really got people working. And
Yeah.
It didn't really go much.
No, it didn't go very
anywhere.
far. It didn't go very
but
far.
It really excited people's imaginations.
Right, people were talking about it, and I remember when I was at David Bourbeau's, one of the conversations that we would have on occasion was, what will we do when books are electronic, when this hypertext thing really takes off, and all books are this way. And, people thought, well, maybe we'll make really beautiful leather cases for the hypertext books. Now, I'm not compelled to make a leather case for a Kindle, I'll tell you. I'm not going there.
Okay. I don't blame you.
Yeah, but so that conversation has been around for a while, and what I would do, I really loved in the first Star Wars, Princess Leia as a hologram,
Yeah.
So I started playing with holographic books at one point, but unfortunately, remember when Center for the Arts in Northampton started? Were you around? You must have been around back then.
Yeah, I don't remember what the project was, but I followed.
Well, it was
Center
when
for
they
the
first
Arts a
when
lot,
they
yeah.
first developed, and they moved into the DA, was that DA Sullivan?
Yeah.
The
Sure, I
Stroll
remember
building.
that, yeah.
I went and talked with them. I wanted to do a project, and I called it Project Alchemy. Now, I was living on Crescent Street, so that was when I was first living here, so that was probably in 82 or 83. And the Center for the Arts had started as a nonprofit arts organization, and they were acting as my umbrella for fundraising for this Project Alchemy. And it was started with a very old fragment binding that had totally fallen apart except for a single leaf, probably on vellum or parchment, that was still hanging on the binding. And it had enough information to make it very curious. And I was taking that fragment, which I would have manufactured myself, and put it inside a box of, say, the 17th century, having rediscovered that fragment and commenting on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that'd be inside a larger container from the 18th century, having discovered the whole thing and commenting right up to, became rather futuristic. The colophon for the futuristic final layer around this thing was to be the largest white light transmission hologram. It hooked up with an artist in Boston, Harriet Kasdan Silver, and she had been an artist in residence at American Optical when they started doing holography. And she was doing white light transmission holograms, and this was going to be 3 feet tall by 4 feet long, and it was going to have everybody involved with the project floating in space in this depth of about 10 feet of depth.
They're doing a lot with holograms. I mean, musicians, they have dead musicians performing on stage
isn't that
and things
amazing?
like that,
Yeah.
and they look like they're standing there.
Yeah. Well, I could see it going that way. Make it. My books have gone sculptural and 3-dimensional, so I love using the
That might be the next step. Have you ever seen the remake of the Time Machine? Time Machine being so great, the original, but the
Right.
second one had a couple cool things in it.
It was set
where
in
he's
New York
moving.
rather than in London, right?
He's moving the information. It's like a hologram. He has the whole library of all human knowledge.
Yep.
He's going to move this here and this there, and he's got like these weird goggles on and all that.
So VR goggles.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the original Time Machine, they had some sort of a disc, and you'd roll it.
Oh, you'd
it
spin
would look
it.
like a CD. Or
I know
something.
it. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
that we spin all sorts of stuff for the information. Now,
But
yeah.
this library that you could with the glasses. So yeah, maybe we'll head something like that.
I'm probably not going to do it, but a lot of people want a chip implanted so that they're wired in. I'm a little old school for that, I think, and I love the physical object.
Sure.
There was an article, I think it was in Scientific American, probably the November before last. The article was Why the Brain Prefers Paper. And
It's a slower process. I
Well-
mean, we have to have some amount of time to absorb information.
also a
Yeah.
book, when you open a book and you're holding it in your hand, you're intimately connected with it, and you can navigate through the book so much more easily than just scrolling one endless scroll, because you have a sense of where you are in the
The
book
comprehension
and
is
positioning.
better. Comprehension is much better with the
Yeah,
book.
yeah, yeah.
Now, I had a fantasy of you and I working on a binding for
Mm-hmm.
an ebook. Now, it wouldn't be Kindle necessarily. It could be. Okay, so we make it 2 pages
Mm-hmm.
facing 2 Kindles. We say that it has to open, it has to have a smell, it has to have a cover, and by the time we're through, we go like, why don't we just read a book and just throw it in the garbage?
Yeah, the one cool thing that I've seen with books, with electronics, is there was a book artist in San Francisco who was taking 2 cameras and able to, I think it might have been just 2 phones, 2 smartphones,
Yeah.
putting them eye distance apart and doing stereo optic books.
That's cool.
And that was
Yeah.
pretty cool with a very simple device.
I saw somebody that took an ebook and printed it, so the pages look like an ebook image. You turn it.
But it was paper.
Like, who cares?
Yeah, well,
It was funny.
e-paper I think could be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if they do have a version that works now, but the resolution's not real high yet.
They might eventually come up with something that smells like a book, walks like a book, looks like a book.
But what smells like well, the mustiness. I mean, that's when it decomposes. I did leather binding for one collector one time, and When I did the gold tooling on the cover, I got some gold leaf stuck down in the deep grain of this leather, and I couldn't get it out of there. So I remembered a conference that I'd gone to, and I think it was Mike Wilcox, after he'd done beautiful finishing on the book, pulled out some clear shoe polish and put it on the leather and then polished it, and all the conservators gasped in the room, of course. But it looked gorgeous. And this was a black leather binding, I took black shoe polish and I hid the gold halo around the tooling. And when I sent the book off, I got a nice reply from the client saying that it was beautiful binding and it smelled more like leather than any of the books in his library.
Because you think of shoe polish as being leather,
I
right?
know it,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I didn't have the heart to tell him what it was.
But you're right, the smell of a book. People come into my bookstore and say, I love the smell of bookstores. And I'll say, it's the smell of decomposition.
That's
It's the
right,
smell of
that's
leather,
right,
you know,
that's right.
rise,
Yeah,
cloth,
yeah.
decomposing paper,
Yeah.
musty, everything, you know, going into the grave. And that's the smell that you got.
The leather does, being animal skin, does have a good smell when it's new, but it's not what people normally, it's more like the new car smell
Yeah.
or something, I suppose.
Yeah.
But at Harcourt, there was the leather room, and whenever anybody was feeling kind of down, you'd just go and hang out in the leather room and just smell the air, and it would pick us all up because we all love that stuff so much.
A new car smell. Go
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've wrapped things up pretty well. Covered everything. I'm going to go around and take some still photos of some of your equipment.
Yeah, and I can
Just
just
to add
give you a
in.
little more information.
Yeah,
if-
that'd be great.
as you do that.
What did you have in here? That
Oh, yeah. Layers in there. 2 of glassware and 1 of heating elements.
Where did you get this?
This was
is
in a junk
amazing.
store in Maine.
A junk store.
And my good friend David, and I we go to junk stores when I go up and visit with him, and I found a couple of pieces of glass apparatus in the store, and I asked the owner of the store, I said, do you have any more of this? I got this wooden box in the back room, if you want to look at it. I said, sure. So I'm looking at it, and I'm drooling over it. And David kept poking me in the side, you know.
Don't drool.
Yeah, no, he was trying to get me to laugh, you know, because he knew I was drooling over it. And
It's a beautiful case. Can you see this other level?
sure. And pull this back.
Wow.
Yep, and then down below is just heating elements. But this is a company that I've been able to find no information about, so I want to take it. I mean, there are a couple things about this that I really
Are you
like.
taking this to Corning?
I'm going to take it to Corning just to. I'm going to take some of this apparatus just to explain what I'm doing with stuff, but also
They might know a little bit about
they might know the
history.
history. So the archivist might have some information about this company, and on this little tag is the name of the salesman who built this case, I'm sure. I think it's Edward Linhoff in, let's see, Concord, Mass, yeah. So I haven't been able to find out
Got to
anything
go back
about
a
him.
little bit so you can get Daniel talking.
So I want to, you know, this sort of thing, it's a little installation, you know, it's part of someone's life. It's that personal element in those 4 elements that I like to bring into the work. Plus, this company, I see nothing online about Metro chemical glassware. So it might
Corning
be
seems like the place to go.
yeah, there's going to be someone there, you know, in the library.
Have you
or
ever
something.
been to the Museum of the American Indian in Corning?
No.
There's this fantastic,
Really?
it's the best museum of the West. It's not just Indians, but cowboys, Indians, the whole, it's unbelievable.
Oh,
Paintings.
I might have some extra time. I could go and
Indian artifacts. And you're going like, how did that end up here? Some guy made a lot of money, bought it, and brought it back.
Yeah. Huh. So, you know, so I like the really old glassware. This isn't so old, but there's some history here. That
How old
will
do
be
you
fun.
think that is?
Well,
What did you say, 20s, 30s?
I don't have my glasses on.
I can't either.
Here, let me grab my glasses. You know, there's a little bit of information there. Yeah, there's a telephone number there.
Call it. It's him, he's calling.
Oh my God.
You go ahead.
Okay, I'll just check. Let's see.